Hello everyone and welcome back to Lights Camera Conversation. This week I am joined by Mr. John Swallow from Test Consulting. John, it's great to have you here.
Thank you very much. Nice to see you. So I was working for GMI, the energy sector section of the business, and we had a young lady there who looked after our marketing. And I think she introduced us. Started in integration, so we were probably doing quite a lot of smart things that kind of still happen now back in the early 2000s. So I worked as an engineer commissioning smart devices in buildings and such like. And then over time, I've ended up with more responsibility and such like. When we met, I joined GMI to set up their energy division. And that was my first sort of advancement towards what we might consider now as consultancy. So I'd never done any consultancy before. I was always an engineer. So I liked being out on site and fiddling with things and providing solution to sticky wickets and such like. So I think the key was that it was a different job for me. It evolved over time as well. I left GMI in 2016 as a management buyout of the section. So GMI Construction were the shareholders. They decided that they wanted to separate the energy side, and the couple of individuals that I were working with at the time decided to sort of fight it out in terms of what they wanted to do with it. And I just took a back seat, really. And I left, but I inherited quite a bit of the work that we'd generated from GMI. And even to this date, the largest client, the longest serving client that we've got as well, Thorn Lighting, was the project that I inherited, which is the video that we did together almost 10 years ago probably, and we still work for Thorn. Realistically now, we're an out-and-out energy consultancy, but in the last couple of years, energy's turned into carbon and solution and all sorts of other things. So engineering's returned back into the fray around kind of understanding and such like. So we've got this consultancy-orientated framework, but then some engineering flair in the background to try and put things on tables and provide more of a holistic style solution provision for clients, really.
When COVID came in, and obviously now in terms of how we're working, I think communication just as a general topic has seen a huge shift in the last few years due to that and changing cultures and emerging technology. What are you sort of seeing in terms of the consulting world of the sort of trend?
Well, let's pick up on the COVID thing, because traditionally we would go to everyone's site. We would be very present in terms of what we were doing. So we'd be site-based activity, go and gather some information, come back, put the reports together. Obviously that stopped overnight. And the very first thing that I decided I wanted to do was, there were some courses around for doing remote auditing. So I did a couple of those so that we could basically keep the things that we were good at going. But secondary to that, it kind of almost opened up several different types of opportunities, really. We had an inquiry from Abu Dhabi, and so that, you know, the thing was that realistically, and everyone was in the same boat. So if I was wanting to try and talk to someone about providing me with services in that part of the world, we connected with BSI, they had an office there, so on. So all of a sudden, we went from being almost like a siloed consultancy to something that was slightly bigger. From my perspective, being a small business, the whole idea was trying to survive, but not necessarily knowing what the journey was going to look like. So you pedal hard in a specific direction and you just try and work it out. But I think for me, it became kind of like another objective. We begin to internationalise the business this year after all that time. But we've tried to focus on just potentially providing the right solution at the right time for the right customer. And your relationship thing is very much at the forefront of that as well. We develop relationships like you and I, but obviously, you know, we're friends. So the key with virtually everyone that I work with is some form of relationship in the background. So that's important. And I think that's kind of like message that we try and give out, that we want to look after people. We want to look after our own staff, and we want to look after our customers and take them on a specific journey. So
it's an interesting question, isn't it? Because you think if you see someone physically,
and you're in kind of that physical space and contact, like now I'm doing this and the two is in the same room. Consultancy is all about building the relationship as well, obviously with a small business. You know, you want to retain your clients. Do you feel there's a shift where you have better relationships with the people that, where there is the opportunity to go to site and then physically meet them, or do you think there's no real difference?
Well, I come from a different age category, so I think the thing is that when I grew up as an engineer, everything was field-based. So everything was, you know, the person that you're dealing with, you've shook their hand, and there was no teams. When I started my apprenticeship, mobile telephones didn't exist. Yeah. So I had a radio pager that I had to run to the telephone box and put 5p's in or whatever to ring the office. Yeah. Pager would go off. But I think the key was around that for us, culturally, that is the way that we did business. I like technology, and we had done some Teams meetings and we'd done some training prior to COVID. But it was a big adjustment for me. I'm comfortable with people. I'd rather be in a room with people and discussing things and reading body language and such like, you know, and directing conversation towards a person who's looking at you or whatever. And it's very difficult to do that when you're on Teams. Having said that, some of the business that we did since COVID has all been around from those types of meetings. I still probably think there's a number of individuals that I still haven't met, and I wouldn't rank them any less than some of my newer clients now. But I do tend to think that and I suppose it might be subliminal, this, to a certain extent, that I can do a little bit better if I'm with the person. So I'm a big one for saying, I'll jump in the car and I'll come down and whatever. And people are a little bit, oh, that's a bit different. And I think, again, though, that goes to the personal touch around what we're doing. We're very touchy, we're very feely around what we're doing. And of course, in order to be able to learn something from an individual, you need to spend a little bit of time with them. And I suppose it's two-dimensional is things like Teams and such like, whereas this is every sensory perception that you've got. So I think that's a key for me, and I kind of feed off it.
For us, again, you know, where we'll do sort of content development sessions with new clients, you know, where we're planning our, you know, new content and ideas and strategizing. Again, we can do all of that remotely, but I often find if you can physically get in a room with people, when you're looking at certain types of work, especially if it's around creativity and you're taking people out of their normal environment, if they're in a home office or the office that they're in every day, and you put them somewhere else, and then there's a group of you sort of bouncing off each other and collaborating, I still don't necessarily think you can better that.
Individually, again, I go back to my own sort of psyche, and it makes me feel comfortable. Yeah. And that's like when I think I'm doing the best that I possibly can. You're right, though, in those situations where you need to put something on a table, focus on something specific around an issue, a problem, or something that needs resolving, those discussions tend to be, for me anyways, slightly more advantageous because you can feel the room to a certain extent. You can also then identify potentially who's the penny's dropped for, and you can kind of focus again your attention on those individuals. We ran some Kaizens for the likes of Thorn, for instance. They're massive team building exercises. We tried to do one online. It didn't have the same engagement. So, you know, I think, I know from my own personal experiences of, say, for instance, doing educational stuff online, you have a tendency of maybe checking your phone a little bit more often, maybe muting yourself, going and making a cup of tea or whatever, and thinking to yourself, well, that 5 minutes, I'll not miss anything. People, for me, are magnets. I'm either attracted or it's not working. If it's not quite there in the first instance, I'll try and sit down and have a think about why it's not working, adjust my language, or again, try a little bit harder. You know, I had an incident a few weeks ago with a client when we were talking about a sticky situation with some carbon calculations. They didn't quite see the benefit of what we were trying to do because at the end of the day they had a number and they thought that they couldn't do anything with it. So I aimed a lot of my language, a lot of my kind of sympathy, understanding towards them in order to make sure that realistically they kind of got a little bit more support on that side. I think I probably failed, but at the same time, I know that I tried my best. So, but you can't gauge that. The worst thing I find about Teams meetings, for instance, is people who turn their cameras off.
No, I would agree. There were 3 of them on this call, and not one of them turned their camera on, which I just thought was really rude, because I was obviously coming in and I prepared a whole presentation, and it's one thing doing it in a room to someone, and again, you're back to body language, eye contact, reading the room. To do that with the key decision makers, that's where video conferencing does open up so many opportunities, and I'm all for it.
Half the time you're looking at your own cameras to work out whether you're in the right place or whatever, and then whoever's speaking or it's just kind of like this constant sort of clocking of what's going on, but you're not necessarily kind of soaking up any type of atmosphere, really.
I think there's been more of a cultural shift, to be fair, with companies, because quite a lot of communications we've been putting out recently are more around things like mental health and around diversity and inclusion. I think there's been, again, since COVID, a bigger shift in focus for bigger companies to kind of make sure that they're putting out those types of communications. Are you sort of finding that in your sort of discussions with clients and developing business relationships?
Yeah, I think the wellness side of things is a good thing that's kind of come along. I think again, off the back of things like COVID, that was a difficult time for everyone. No one knew what was kind of happening, and realistically, then no one kind of knew when the line was going to end. There was no light at the end of the tunnel for a certain period of time. But the cultural thing for us kind of always existed. So if I look at work as a potential sort of playground to kind of have a look at, I think the key is that we've always kind of suggested that people are very important within an energy management program, for instance. So when we've had successful stories, it's always when we've built a decent team. It's always when those team members have worked together, but have also then taken the pain from an external consultant like us and then done some actions around it. But there are some behavioural change things within energy management. So I think, again, being a people kind of person, that falls very nicely into kind of what we're doing. But I think, it's always a tool that we use. And again, it's a way of being able to gauge who can do what when you're learning about their capacity, their understandings, what they like to do, what they don't like to do, so on. But I think that's a key thing within the whole thing. So if I look at the Kaizen was a typical example of how we basically just took something that no one had ever kind of thought about doing before and turning that into an event where we got some real understanding from it. They put their hard work into it, and then we kind of helped kind of cultivate those ideas. But they were their ideas, and the thing is with me being a consultant, and it's possibly the same for you, I'm not there all the time.
No.
So you might give your customers a schedule of work that they're supposed to get through in the period of time that you're not on site. And for long periods of time, when you're developing these relationships, that doesn't happen. So what you end up doing is you go and they've not done all the work. So then you're kind of pedaling backwards. But once you've engaged with those people, you've got over those barriers, it starts to happen a lot more in terms of osmosis from the culture of the whole thing. And that's when it shifts. That's a key thing around people, because there's only one thing motivates it, and that's their actions. So and you can't do that influencing without educating, and you can't do that education without challenging, and you have to do more than what's just kind of like written down on a list. You've got to get into the psyche of the whole thing. And the key with a behavioural change kind of thing, it starts at the top.
Digital transformation then, I think, has been another trend. And obviously you're in the area where your clients will analyse and use a lot of data and probably be leaning in, I imagine, to quite a few AI tools and analytics. So how has that changed? Because there's so many companies now undergoing quite large digital transformation programs.
Again, it kind of falls into our potential strengths to a certain extent. A lot of systems that we're building on site now are much easier to kind of do because of things like IoT and such like. We did some reports and some of our own analysis recently and used a few AI tools to do some of the calculations. We reverse engineered it as well just to make sure that it worked, but it does. So I think for us, it's kind of been a bit of an accelerant. If I looked at what we were doing sort of R&D wise 3 years ago, there'd be no mention of AI, whereas now it's involved in virtually every other sentence in terms of what we're doing. So we have embraced it. We took on a grad last year and it's every other word for him. So rather every other sentence for me, it's every other word for him. So I think, but the key is around potentially still making sure that it's distilled, and because it's a powerful tool. But I think from our side, we're very digital anyways. Most of our software packages have analytics built into them, and they've got whizzy tools and such like. So, we might resell a software license to a client knowing full well that they'll only ever use 20% of its capacity. Yeah. But that's because basically they're built to do all sorts of other different bits and pieces. But I think the key is around the size of the opportunity, and it has to be fit for purpose in the first instance, and so therefore then a client buying something that's got 80% wriggle room is for future capacity in terms of understanding, learning and such like, because we're still all learning about it as well. But we've been techie for years. I think one of the things I said to you earlier on was we were doing things in 2008 which were classified as IoT, and IoT didn't exist then. So the Internet of Things has been around for a long period of time. It's a lot more malleable now. It's a lot easier, and it's a lot more integrable as well. So, but the map is massive. There are some interesting gaps in that area. So we all talk about now carbon emissions and the reduction of CO2 and maybe even things like net zero or carbon neutrality, and people are installing technologies that are allegedly going to solve that problem. But we also know as well from analysis that doesn't always work. So the key is around potentially breaking bad news to customers when things haven't exactly worked the way that they should have.
Do they bring in an energy consultant at kind of the pre-stage, so where you're there in the planning side, just to kind of think, well, if we built it in this way, or if it linked in this way to this and this, or it's engineered in this way, we're more likely to be able to see these kind of results that we're expecting, rather than investing, millions into something and going, oh, well, that's not going to give us what we thought it was.
I think the calculations are there. I spent some time with a client in London the other week. They work in the as-built sector, so they're a lighting controls business. So they go in to the likes of Bishopsgate, for instance, and put all the lighting controls in there. I was talking to the MD, and they were kind of sort of saying that lots of people are potentially now wanting to build buildings net zero from the start. So that the key is that the calculations are done, and to simplify that to a certain extent. So if I talked about the operational carbon of that particular building, that's very easy to model these days. Whereas embodied carbon is slightly more difficult because we don't really know how to do the calculations or see the benefit of them. Like we used to have in buildings before, where they were getting built as sort of like on price, for instance. Well, things that cost more money that they couldn't already afford potentially came out of specification. They're building these buildings with the idea that they would be net zero, but then when they fall into difficulty, if they've been in the ground for 10 weeks longer than they should have been, and then they don't have the money to spend to kind of put all the whistles and bells in, the first thing that comes out is any of the kind of things that would be better for the environment. And they're calling that carbon value engineering now. So there are tools there to do all of this, but I don't think there's enough people that understand the outcomes. We're in a situation where we have to wait for things to fail before we can find out why they've gone wrong.
Stephen Bartlett, do you follow him? He talks a lot about running experiments, just in the sense of like with your own research and development. And I'm like, yeah, that does make sense. You have to kind of try things, fail, then you learn, and then you try more things. So we've set up a little sort of experiment area.
Failing fast is the best. I think the thing is for us though, in the last couple of years, we've kind of hit a bit of a rich vein, to be honest. So we've been more adaptive. So I think that's kind of worked in our favour, really. But again, it's all been based off the back of technology and such like as well.
So some interesting insights in there. I can't let you leave though without you telling me, come on, what's your favourite film? It doesn't necessarily have to be in this room.
I do like sports films. I don't mind an odd musical, but at the same degree, all films that I would have watched either with my family as I was growing up, and they stick in your mind to a certain extent. But, you know, sports films, Rocky, I can see Rocky up there. So I saw that when it first came out. I was on holiday in Canada, so I remember it, and the Star Wars stuff as well. So I'm a big fan of all that kind of thing. So, but I would say The Deer Hunter.
I mean, it's of its time and style, because that is a slow film, like by today's terms.
It just captures the whole feeling about the torture and whatnot, and I kind of felt all of those emotions. You know, in the Russian roulette scene is something else. So,
and everyone relates to different films for different reasons, and you know, films they're interesting because for some people they're a real escape, or some people want to be kind of blown away, and you know, with some of the Marvel stuff and the effects going into that, some people just love the drama or the grittiness or the kind of characters where it becomes quite relatable, depending on what you've gone through, I guess, in your life.
Oh, so many different ones. I mean, Tron, for instance, I'm a massive fan of Tron. The first one. The second one is obviously 20, 30 years on, and it's amazing, you know, and I'm taking my boy to see stuff like that. Batman's up there, you know, all the stuff like that. It's great, you know, but I had Beautiful Mind on my list as well.
All right, yeah.
But I also had a film called Angels with Dirty Faces, but you've probably never heard of that one.
Is that the film that's played in Home Alone?
Nah, it's similar. I don't think it is. So it's a James Cagney film. There's a similar feel to Angels with Dirty Faces. It's all a little bit about... So it's about a gangster. But I remember watching it with my sisters. So it's like, that's an anchor as well. So
yeah, you were right, by the way. It is Angels with Eve and Filthier Souls.
Wow. Thank you for having us. It's been great.